Good morning, good morning, good morning. Please come on in, come on in, come on in. My name is Marvin Sauter, and I have the pleasure of being the chairman of the Illinois African Descent Citizen Reparations Commission. And we are so excited to be here with you all today. Before we get started, we would like to welcome Tiffany Williams up for a welcome. And then we'll get into our introduction and acknowledgements. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Tiffany Williams. I'm the athletic director here at Southeast High School, and really feel honored at the opportunity to welcome you here to our facility and to our community this morning. We want to thank our African Descent Citizens Reparations Commission for choosing Springfield as a location and a platform to present this important message and to encourage the conversation, keep this conversation going about the needs of our community. I'm here as a 25-year educator, began my career here in Springfield, and I've stayed here the entire time, but it's been a journey, especially coming from an environment where I traveled a lot as a military child, all over the United States and Germany, and then being able to plant roots here in Springfield, develop those roots, and be able to have the perspective of one who now has married into a large family, and a family, again, that really resides here in one single community. It has brought much enrichment to my life. It is, as a member of this community, to be involved in these types of discussions, projects, events, and opportunities so that I can give back as much as I can to the students that I have vowed to serve. Educators are motivated in general by the needs of our students in our community. And then in high school, as those needs are very different when students don't have access to private lessons, and making sure that they feel included in some club, organization, or their school. I then advocated for school choice. As principal across the street from here, I promoted a multi-age learning environment to build student-teacher relationships. And then curriculum consistency, as that school had students in grades 1 through 8. I now reside in high school athletics, where I advocate for equity amongst sports, across genders, and across class. I find it very interesting that we still use the term class as we describe participation, with all of the connotations that that word still holds in different environments. We still deal in a time where there's concern about small towns that my athletes travel to, how the crowd will treat them, things that will be said to them as they participate in interscholastic play, whether or not they'll be treated fairly by officials that have been selected by opposing athletic directors, and also, as what happened very recently, whether or not racial slurs will be hurled at my students as they leave another school on their bus to return home. Now, this welcome this morning is not to characterize myself, my community, or my students as victims necessarily. In our community, we prefer words like soldiers, warriors, or Spartans. And we face those battles regularly in and out of the classroom and on and off the field. But the purpose of today is to be able to focus. And I think if there's other educators in the room, even politicians or activists, it can be hard for us to choose, where we can use our voice the loudest. We need people such as what we have today to focus on specific areas such as reparations. We welcome those who have the knowledge, education, experience, and influence to focus on African American leadership, advocacy for people of color, equity, inclusion, and specifically reparations. We still see the effects of the trauma that this country is built upon. And at Southeast High School, we're very proud to be a part of the positive change, not only for Springfield, for the state of Illinois, and again then to influence other states across our nation. Thank you and welcome.
Next, I would like to introduce the African Descent Citizen Reparations Commission to you all. Can we please pull up the Commissioner PowerPoint presentation? As I said before, my name is Marvin Sauter. I have the pleasure of being the chairman of the Illinois African Descent Citizens Reparations Commission. We will be brief in our introductions of the commissioners. We will not read off all biographies, but I do encourage you all to visit our website at adcrc.illinois.gov to review the biographies of each of these amazing commissioners. Our board vice chair is Stephanie Taylor. Our board secretary is Roger Ellion. One of our commissioners is also State Senator Christopher Belt, as well as State Representative Sonia Harper. We also have Commissioner Jackie Algie. One of our newly appointed commissioners, Monique Jones. Commissioner Deborah Cosi Lane. Commissioner Carlton Mayers II. Commissioner Twyla Moore. Commissioner Rakisha Felon. Commissioner Joel Sacknoff. Commissioner Dr. Jeffrey Trask. Commissioner Dominic Watson. Commissioner and Representative Tom Weber. And lastly, Commissioner Dr. Theodore Williams III. Before continuing on, we would like to acknowledge any public servants in the audience. We see Alderman Ray Williams, Jr. Now, we'll move on to a brief description of the ADCRC and the topics that we will be discussing, and then we'll get into our future presentations. The Illinois African Descent Citizens Reparations Commission is an official government body tasked with developing, recommending measures to ensure equity, equality, and parity for African American descendants of slavery. Through a series of targeted measures that include preserving African American neighborhoods, the creation of a vocational training center, ensuring proportional representation in all state contracts, and the creation and enforcement of an Illinois slavery era disclosure bill. The Illinois ADCRC has been hard at work since our initial meeting in December of 2022 to develop measures that will ensure equity, equality, and parity for African American descendants of slavery here in Illinois. To that end, the commission is dedicated to bidirectional education between the commission and members of the public, recognizing that our lived experience is a form of expertise. The commission has embarked on a series of public engagements to engage with community, academic experts, activists, practitioners, and politicians on the 11 harm areas that the Commission has adopted. Are the 11 harm areas showing? Yes, they are. Thank you. So these 11 harm areas are shown on the screen. They are enslavement, racial terror, political disenfranchisement, housing segregation, education, the pathology of the Black family, racism in environment and infrastructure, stolen labor and hindered opportunity, the legal system, mental and physical harm and neglect, and the racial/lineage wealth gap. To that end, the Commission has onboarded a research team that is responsible for the creation of a harm report with aims to publish in December of 2025. This will incorporate the testimonies that you all will share today in each of our public hearings, so we encourage your full and active participation. Today's public hearing will focus specifically on the issues of enslavement, racial terror, and political disenfranchisement. We will have 3 expert presentations on these topics from Dr. Camille Kamau, Dr. Lisa Johnson, and Dr. Pamela Hoff. We will then pivot to registered public comment from members of the community, and then we will end with a pivot to in-person, one-way public comment. If you have not already done so, please sign up for the public one-way public comment at the ADCRC table to receive your number. We will call members of the public up in groups of 5. Members of the public will have 2 minutes, I repeat, 2 minutes to share. After expending their time, the mic will be quieted to allow for the next member to share. But don't worry, we do have other ways to be able to hear from you, and we encourage you to take a snap at the QR codes that will be both on screen and at the bottom of your page to submit Slido comments or to submit long-form comments to the ADCRC via our website. The next speaking voice you will hear will be that of Dr. Kamau Kamau.
Well, that was a wonderful introduction. It gave me the chance to explain that the drum is an acknowledgement of our ancestors. That more so than anything is why we're here today. I was tasked with speaking about enslavement. The 3 important passages we know of the middle passage. The first passage was from the inlands to the coastal areas in Africa. We don't know how many people were lost in that. There's no reliable way to begin to account for it. The middle passage, from the coast of Africa to the New World, from New York down to Sao Paulo, the Caribbean, New Orleans, Jamaica, places like Charleston and Washington, D.C. This is where our people were brought. From there, the third passage began, and they were transported inland to places like Kentucky, Alabama, Tennessee. Maybe not so far, but often walking in chains and coffles. He said there were maybe 12 million lost in the middle passage. I think that's low. I'm not going to argue with the experts on that. We don't know how many of us were lost to the racial violence. Someone will be speaking about racial terror. But be assured that white supremacy solved that. Black folk who stood up were sat back down, were laid back down, were laid out, quite often buried or unburied, just left hanging on a tree. That's some of the legacy of enslavement. We go back to that first passage. People were taken away from, however you define civilization, without looking at technology. We had it. It was taken from us. I have some prepared remarks. I want to preface my brief words with the definition of health that WHO offers. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Consider that definition applied in a public health context. Are our communities absent of disease or infirmity? If we're speaking psychological, sociological, political senses, if we're looking at the cultural realities that you can find, just go 2 miles concentric from here and you'll see what I'm talking about. I live in anger. I swim in anger because I refuse to let myself drown in it. I live in anger because I know this history. It has motivated, it has fueled me. I believe in reparations because these motherfuckers owe us. Now, some of y'all might be thinking that's a little profane. I'll quote Jackie Bryce Finch, one of my colleagues at JMU. Save the profane for the truly profane. If you consider what was done to our female ancestors, generations and generations, I speak as a light-skinned black man, not born from the last 50 years, the last half century of jungle fever. The heritage is here. We don't always know who those great-grandmothers, great-great-grandmothers, those ancestresses were. But this attests to what happened to them. I cannot see reparations as a mere, albeit complex, system of reimbursement. I do not see reparations as punitive. Reparations are a debt owed to humanity, a debt owed with late fees and compound interest accumulated over generations, over lifetimes. Reparations must be holistic, systematic, tenacious, persistent, and global. Reparations must be reciprocal. Reparations must repair, restore, rehabilitate, and yes, reimburse our communities tenaciously, persistently, and globally. Consider the long-term effects, the impacts, the devastations, mutations, and losses that occurred over centuries of their colonial enterprises, and then the post-colonial manifestations of caste and inequalities. I would be remiss if I did not add that the displaced and genocided indigenous communities are also owed such a range of reparations. That's not the subject for today. But standing where we are in a state called Illinois, we've got to take that into account too. We must start by teaching and telling the truth. So all of us, especially the children, know what was lost, stolen, or strayed, so they have the knowledge base and critical consciousness to see and understand the lies that have been told and are continuing to be told. More than that, though, such an education is a requisite first step to preparing the youth to be contributors in major human enterprises. Reparations must build and rebuild community-serving institutions. If we consider how we, as Africans displaced across the diaspora, if I'm talking about African Americans here, rebuild cultural institutions, cultural patterns, where the drum might not seem strange, where mudcloth is not an unusual attire. Politically, complete disenfranchisement went from no voice to a whisper. And even within that whisper, we're minorities. Even with right on our side, we can't vote in what we need to have happen. This is where reparations needs to hit. Economically, I talked about that debt that's owed with compound interest and late fees. For various estimates, between 50 and 75% of the GDP of the U.S. stemmed from the slave trade and its related colonial enterprises. That's a lot of money that was made off us. We didn't reap any of those benefits. That's a debt long past due. We want it all. We deserve it all. I know some of you are thinking, Kamal, that's crazy. Be realistic. Reparations like that will never happen. Have you ever heard of the National Negro Convention movement? How many of you heard of that? Teach the truth. Teach the whole truth. Groups ranging from 100 to 300 successful, mostly black men, from 1830 to 1864, met in major cities, met in Alton, Milton, Philadelphia, met all over the country, trying to deal with repairing the community. And y'all don't know about it. And it's not your fault. It will take years to get the country to acknowledge reparations and the need for it and the way that we deserve it. I started to do some research and look into other countries and other places that have received reparations. We deserve it. We've earned it. But once that commitment is made, it's going to take years. Those same number of generations, those same number of lifetimes that were taken and stolen from our ancestors, it's going to take a commitment of years to get that back, to rebuild, to repair, to restore. Enslavement. Y'all have seen the movies, read the books, heard the various horror stories. You don't often hear the stories of resistance. We resisted from day one, fighting people off who were trying to take us into slavery in the unnamed, undocumented cities in Africa. We resisted on the slave ships. We resisted wherever they landed. That's our ancestral heritage. That's why I beat the drum, asking them to embrace and understand what I'm talking about today. That's why I swim in anger. I'm not going to drown. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are no pretty pictures. Only thing we can do is continue to resist and work toward better days for all of us. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Our next featured speaker will speak on the topic of racial terror, and that will be Dr. Lisa Johnson.
Good morning. Under the guise of morality, law, and order, racialized control through terror. Much of my specialization is in the social psychology of social inequality. And it asks the question, how did we get here and why? Why? The history of terror, lynching, complicates contemporary issues of race, punishment, crime, and justice, mass incarceration, excessive penal punishment, disproportionate sentencing of racial minorities or minoritized, and police abuse of people of color reveal problems in U.S. society that are framed in the terror era. The narrative of racial difference that lynching dramatized continues to haunt us today. Avoiding honest conversation about this history has undermined our ability to build a nation where racial justice can be achieved. These are words that are quoted in Lynching in America, Confronting the Legacy of Racial Terror. We are now on the 3rd edition. The picture that you see before you is an advertisement for a phenomenon that occurred during the lynching era. You see, lynching a black man, and they were usually black men, came with an honor status. And so quite often, scores of white Americans would gather, sometimes after church, and bring their picnic baskets and watch as black men hung and died before them. Quite often, hanging was not enough. choking to death was not enough, wherein we see in our history that even as Black men were hung, they were also shot. Their limbs were cut off of their bodies, and then they were burned. Killing us was not enough. The purpose of lynching was not just to punish the initial individual, it was to send a message of terror to entire communities so that they would not attempt to engage in any activity that would challenge the racialized hierarchical order that was established at the very beginning of U.S. society. And so we understand, go back one please, and so we understand that intergenerational terror, I hope I'm on the right one, yes. The intergenerational cycle of terror is not just about the lynching. Racialized terror is established in systemic phases that moralized lynching and used it to establish a racialized law and order system that is still approved of today. Still approved of today. As part of my job as a researcher and a professor in sociology, specializing in race and ethnicity and in stratification and social inequality, I have engaged in 2 racial projects here in Springfield. One traces terror and disenfranchisement from 1908 until today. That is the time of the Springfield riots. The other traces disenfranchisement as a result of segregation, redlining, housing inequalities. I would like to ask you if you understand how terrorizing it is to be poor in America. I believe that we must extend and broaden our definition of terror. We must extend and broaden our definition of violence. Because what has been inflicted upon us, you may move forward, please. What has been inflicted upon us is a system of several types of terror and violence. We have been deprived of social support for overall well-being. Dr. Kamayo already said something to that effect. Our economic well-being, our psychological well-being, our physical well-being, and our social well-being have all been wrecked systematically over time from the very beginning. We are denied financial services, physical health services. We are denied more frequent bus routes that will help us to get from one place to another. We are denied access to better schools. We are denied homeownership opportunities. That is just the material supports that we have been denied. In emotional supports, we have been denied mental health services for youth and adults. We are denied supportive teachers. We are denied the opportunity to have equitable neighborhood gatherings. We are denied. From the informational side of social support, we are denied outlets. Okay? We are denied local libraries. We are denied, and that was supposed to be Black news outlets, right? We are denied special advertising in Black communities. We have several marketing experts among us. Sociologists, several sociologists, go into public relations and marketing. I did. But it became so difficult to challenge my energies toward marketing to my community, because that's not the way the system is set up. The system is set up that if I get paid for a corporation, then I must focus on the corporation's goals, not my people's goals. That is the way our system is set up. We are denied appraisal supports, honest mentoring programs, honest mentoring programs that take into consideration our cultural heritage. It is unsustainable. The way that we are denied comes through socialization efforts. Generation over generations of leaders in the United States are socialized to make us understand that the system that is in place is the way it is supposed to be. And therefore, we, as Black people, internalize that socialization and then are trained to turn the scope on our own group members. And if we do not punish our group members, then we lose jobs. Tell me that is not terror. In every course that I teach, I tell my students the same things. There are 5 basic social institutions to any society, and there are at least 4 major socializing agents. Those 5 institutions are the government, religion, the economy, the education system, and the family. The 4 basic socializing agents are the family, our work and schools, our communities. That is a major socializing agent. How many times have Black and white families in Illinois been training their children to disregard people from another racial or ethnic group? What happens at the dinner table at 6 o'clock behind closed doors while you are having family conversations? How do you socialize your children at midnight? What do you say to your children when you realize that they are dating someone from another race or ethnic group? Because you can say one thing in public, but their behavior shows up in what you tell them in private. The injustice permeates all facets of society. And the purpose is to keep Black people in our place. What is our place according to the systemic rules of order? Our place is always subservience to whiteness. This is the system in which we have been educated. This is the system in which we worship. This is the system that bugs our phones when we're talking to our friends. This is the system that has satellites that catches certain words and phrases in our conversations. This is the system that has television cameras that we don't even know about in our places of employment. We have been forever. 400 years is forever to me. We have been forever conditioned and socialized to know our place and then to train our children to act as if they know theirs. The justification, next. That looks different from mine. go next. Yeah, I already said that. Thank you very much. The justification came to us through scientific racism, through the anthropologists and botanists who discovered so many parts of the globe and then classified, remember the word classified different groups of people. Notice that Afrikaners were given a status of an agent. Carolus Linnaeus also described us as crafty, slow, foolish, ruled by caprice. If you understand intergenerational socialization, you understand that that catches, that sticks, and it is passed down through families, whether they say it out loud or not. What happens behind closed doors in your households, at the dinner table, and before you go to bed, and as you are traveling to school, and hear your conversations? The socialization is what happens. And so scores of people who believe that they are moral and just and righteous have been socializing us to believe that we are less than, that we are insufficient, that we must be subservient to whiteness. That is the justification. We have been infused, all of our systems have been infused with violence specialists. I used to teach a course called genocide. I used to teach a course called genocide. It's no matter. It still comes up in my race and ethnicity class. It still comes up in my social psychology course. It still comes up in, my economic sociology reading. It still comes up in my sociology of work and occupations courses. We are surrounded by violence specialists who develop institutionalized riot systems to convert incidents like peaceful protests into ethnic riots. My research has taken place in Springfield, and we have had a series of peaceful protests after the death, the murder of Sonia Massey. Police departments have been warning their employees that the protesters would be violent. Now, in 1917, after the East St. Louis riots, there was a very peaceful march in New York City. It was a silent march, yet and still, several were arrested, several were detained under the guise of morality, law, and order. So we have known for quite some time that it does not matter how we present ourselves. It does not matter how smart we are, how many degrees we have, how much money we have. We are still supposed to incorporate the socialization that we will forever be subservient to whites. I told you they were violent. They ought to stop looting. They are criminals. They, us, them, they are barbaric. We are civilized. This makes ethnic cleansing, institutional racism, discrimination, housing segregation, and genocide all the more viable to the onlooking public. I just got some information this week from our local ACLU. In 2023, Black drivers in Springfield were 5.7 times more likely to be stopped by police while driving than white drivers. And plenty of us have been given to understand that, oh no, that happens on the east side of town. No. These drivers were stopped on the west side of town. These drivers were stopped in the north. These drivers were stopped all over Springfield. It did not matter what cars they drove. It did not matter where they were driving. The idea is that they are black, and therefore they must be dangerous, and even more so if they make a lot of money. Public dehumanization. Move forward. I don't even want to talk about him right now. In teaching the genocide course, we are given to understand that there are 10 stages of genocide. Classification, which I've already told you about with Carolus Linnaeus and Blumenbach. Symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, an organization and a bureaucracy that makes discrimination legal. Polarization, I'm sure no one has heard about that in this election year. Preparation, persecution. How many times must we endure the stigma of blackness? There is an inherent stigma that comes with the color of your skin. Why would a man have to mention that he had light skin? Because he knows that it is a part of his status in the United States, and he is persecuted for it. Extermination comes in many forms, just like violence and terror does. You don't have to kill somebody to exterminate them. Were you aware of that? You don't have to kill them. You just have to kill their souls. You just have to kill their spirit. You just have to kill their ability and their wherewithal to stand up to injustice, and you have so much as murdered them. Sonia Massey is no new news. And then after that comes the denial. Now, I would like to tell you that genocide occurs in a linear fashion and goes around in a circle like this, but it does not. Any part of this circular system can happen at any time. And so in 1951, Paul Robeson, W.E.B. Du Bois, several others appealed to the United Nations and said, we cry genocide. This is not new news. We cry genocide. They are not just killing us. They are demoralizing us. They are persecuting us. They are discriminating against us. They are organizing against us. That is genocide. But do you know what the United States did? Because this was still also at the time of the Cold War. So the United States government just quashed it. They used all of their energy. Our government used all of their energy to divert attention away from those individuals and that group and make the United Nations concentrate on the Cold War instead of the genocide that was occurring and still does occur in the United States. And since that time, any time the United States has tried to call out against China or Canada or any other nation and say, you are practicing genocide. You know what Trudeau says to the United States? Oh, you better hush. Because you've been doing this for a long time. But the problem is, regular United States citizens never see that. And so they are left with the socialization and the socializing efforts that take place through the education system, through the media, through the churches, through the families, through the communities. And if you squeeze out the education system so that people will not have access to the truth in the first place, then you have started a psychological warfare that will reproduce racialized inequality over generations. Next slide, please. So then, how are we to examine racial harm to Black communities? We must examine it through a lens of historical and intergenerational trauma. Historical and intergenerational trauma posits that any individual continues to experience the effects of the trauma experienced by their family members in previous generations. Have you heard of vicarious trauma? That is another type of trauma that says that anybody in the community continues to experience trauma as a result of experiences that other communities have. How many of our people are in jail right now? How many of our people have been shot? How many of our people are engaged in local warfare? So many people would like to tell you that the violence that occurs on the east side of Springfield and on the south side and the west side of Chicago and in East St. Louis is our fault. As a part of my research, I have also been listening in and attending Springfield City Council meetings. You would not be surprised at all at how many people, even as recently as a week and a half ago, someone said, it's the parents' fault. I blame the parents. If you get your children in line, if you, right, teach your children how to do right, then we wouldn't have all these problems. That's a very interesting concept. And then a white woman got up and said, they need to get back to spanking these children. A beloved woman. She's beloved in the community. They need to get back to spanking. But you know what happens if we start spanking our children again, don't you? Then you've got an institution of social welfare, right? That starts taking our children away from us, much the same ways that they took our children away from us when they snatched them out of our womb when we were coming to this country in the first place. This is a repeat. This is a reproduction of inequality through several different means. We have research that teaches us about the structural factors that help to fuel cultural factors in our society. And we understand that intergenerational trauma is not just passed down through the stories that we tell. Epigenetics will tell us that trauma passes through our reproductive genes. And the National Institutes of Health have published this work. We understand that when whole social groups are deprived of access to resources, like proper schools, like Black teachers, I am so tired, ladies and gentlemen, of teaching in college and having a young Black student tell me that I am their first Black teacher. They are in college. Only 33% of US citizens ever get to college. Only 25% graduate. So are you telling me that when you take my 300 level classes, by the time you are a junior in college, you have not had any Black teachers? Terrorism comes in several different forms. Next slide, please. How are we to right the wrongs? How are we to right the wrongs? As I said, my research has taken place in Springfield. We have entities like the Springfield Sangamon Growth Alliance. I watched as someone in the Springfield Sangamon Growth Alliance made a presentation to the Sangamon County Board. And Springfield is so excited to be getting new companies coming in Springfield. They hire 100, 150 employees. They're so excited. One thing I did not hear that presenter mention is whether any of those employees were going to come from the east side of Springfield. One thing I did not hear that person mention was what would be the educational requirements of those new employees. One thing I did not hear that speaker mention was what would be the racial makeup of those 150 employees. So while the city of Springfield is celebrating this new expansion and this economic development, we, the Black people in Springfield, are still left in terror. Does anybody know how terrorizing it is to be impoverished? The 186th School Board is still operating under a consent decree that was delivered to them in 1976. You're looking at me telling me it's 74. I talked to Dr. Betts, it was official. Tell me, Bert. It's 76. It's okay, I'm looking at you, that's fine. There you go, but it was put into action. That was when the suit started. It's put in action in 76, okay? I'm a teacher. I look at my students, right? And whether it was 74 or 76, that's still too long. They're still under that consent decree. The fire department, the police department, we have beautiful officers here. Ask them where their beat is. Ask them if their beat is on the west side of Springfield. Quite often in my research, I talk to regular people, and they will tell me about their experiences trying to deal with the school board. But you understand, if the city and the state and the nation has been involved in this type of reproduction of social inequality that terrorizes our citizens for this long, I don't even blame the quote-unquote bad kids in 186. Do you know why? Because if we have passed down terror through our genes for over 419 years, those babies are coming out of the womb revolting. They are coming out of the womb revolting. They can feel that something is wrong. They have felt it in their mother's wombs. They can feel it in their families, in their households. They understand that this is wrong. Have you ever spoken to a Black boy who has dropped out of school at the age of 16? He is actually quite intelligent. Have you ever spoken to the class clown? They actually understand. Plenty of our children are suspended at 4 times the rate of white children and diagnosed with something called oppositional defiant disorder. What is it? They disagreed with the teacher. They spoke up too much. They raised their hands too much. They asked too many questions. Well, that seems quite interesting to me, that our white children are raised to question and our black children are raised to stay quiet. They are coming out of the womb revolting. I do not blame them, and I will not sign off with anyone who blames the parents. How many times do we have to say that Black Lives Matter? And then hear someone else say that all lives matter. Now, I'm going to talk about that person whose picture that I saw up here before. I live in Ward 6. And my alderman is Jennifer Notoriano, white woman. She is the only member, white member, of our city council who has undertaken anti-racism training through Crossroads. The only one. And she came out of that training swinging. Okay? And what she said was that you cannot continue to say all lives matter if you don't act like all lives matter. Well, do you know what that man whose picture I showed y'all? You know what he said? We work very hard to make sure that we are protecting all lives in Springfield. Now, you know what? You just said all lives matter. How many times do we have to say that Black Lives Matter and have a retort of all lives matter? The whole reason that we are saying that Black Lives Matter is because they do not. Not in your policy, not in your procedures, not in your actions, not in the way you treat our children, not in the way you turn down our loans, still not in the way that our black business go before your city council and get denied for TIF funds, CDBG funds, home funds. Black lives don't matter to y'all. Why don't you just say the truth and stop lying to us? Stop lying. Next slide. So in my courses, I say these things. I'm quite frank in all of my courses. As I have said, I'm me wherever I go. And so I ask students to respond to some of the things that I'm saying. Earlier this year, as a part of one of our research studies, I and Dr. Devin Hunter and Peter Cole and Tandra Thomas in East St. Louis, we took a few people to the Equal Justice Initiative museums. Roger came with us, Mr. Elion. And that week I had been discussing Abraham Lincoln and whether or not he really freed the slaves. So then I'm an associate professor, and I had a white professor who was much higher in rank than me to tell me, thank you very much, that I was inaccurate in my teaching. And I told him, you're not a sociologist, you don't understand history, and you're not a black woman, and you don't understand history from the perspective of a black woman, so I'm not gonna come in your class, and you need to stay the hell out of mine. Come out, did it, he cussed. I can cuss too. I asked my students for responses. One student said, when I learned that he, Abraham Lincoln, wasn't the hero I believed him to be, I was disappointed. I had assumed that the U.S. was no longer racist because it had all these great leaders. I was wrong. The truth is always out there as long as you question things and put on your sociological goggles. At any age, you can see how inequalities form in our societies, whether in the workplace, among friends, or even within our own homes. If we acknowledge these inequalities and act on them, the future might be brighter for less powerful groups. That was a 20-year-old. If you teach them the truth, they're gonna come out with a different mindset. Here's someone else said, another student said, misinformation affects how we form our views on various issues, including stereotypes and victim blaming. Once we fully understand what is going on, perhaps even those in higher social classes with higher socioeconomic status, I am teaching them this, will change their ways, giving people a chance in life, protecting their voices and opinions, valuing each other's worth, and treating one another with equality. These are students. These are 20-year-olds. Next slide. I need for everybody to understand that as we work on healing, one of the last things I will say is that I'm working with SIU School of Medicine and Memorial Health to devise healing circles. And every time I start out with the truth, because you cannot heal without accountability. And this is where reparations comes in. Of course we want our money back, but what we would much rather prefer is that you get these systems in order, that you get the education system to teach the truth, that you get our government officials to stop. I've got, one of them just left, you've got 2 black aldermen that are here today. They have been asking the city of Springfield for a list of minority contractors for at least 1 year. Should sound simple, but the city has not revealed it to them. How difficult, how awful must it be to be in a space of leadership in the city and still be disregarded so boldly, so fiercely, so hatefully. I would like for us to consider that healing does require accountability, willingness, and action. And unless you find a way to change the reproduction of inequality, then there will be no healing in the land. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. The next speaker will be that of Dr. Hoff.
Habari Gani? Njima Habari Gani. I'd like to start with a story. Well, first, the title of my talk is From the Coffle to the Classroom, Education as Political Disenfranchisement. So if you would, go with me across the Atlantic back to Africa. And if you've been there, then imagine. If not, I'll try to paint a picture as much as I can to the central region of Ghana. About 2.5 hours outside of the capital of Accra, in a small township named Asinmanso. And in this particular township is a river. And the river is aptly called the Slave River. And this particular city, even though it's been identified as a large gateway for enslaved Africans to be dispersed throughout the U.S. and the Caribbean, it really didn't get a lot of attention until the year of return. And it is certainly the largest port, slave port. And so when you get to this city, it's an eeriness there. It's a heaviness that blankets the city. And when you drive into the main road, you really don't see a lot of people because the people are really skittish. And they are skittish because once the people on the coastal regions had been decimated, of course, the slavers wanted to move inland. And this particular city sits right at the entrance to the interior. It is also this particular river. It connects, it's a basin, it connects with the Atlantic. So this is the place where you had enslaved Africans moving from the inland. And when they were marched from the inland, if you will, they were marched in what was called coffles. Brother mentioned earlier, and they were chained together, and sometimes these walks would be for months, and so people were debilitated when they arrived at this point. Some of them had never even seen water. You know, you're landlocked, so you have no idea about this large body of water, even if it's just a river. So they were exhausted. But what was interesting about the coffles and when they moved inland, there was always a teacher, someone identified as a teacher on these coffle walks. And this person would be responsible. They did a lot of psychological work that Sister Lisa talked about. They would tell the enslaved that you're going to a better place. They would also teach the rudiments of language. These people were educators. And they would accompany folk. And when they got down to this city and this river, they would take, of course, their last bath. Well, they would actually have 2 baths. One was to refresh, if you could be refreshed after you were filled with terror. And then you would, of course, move in to be bathed again to make yourself presentable. And the teacher was responsible for acclimating and doing all the psychological and social work for these folk to really accept their new identity and status and roles. It was interesting, they would say, you're going to a better place. You're going to make sure. These were some of the things, and they would actually set them down. I tell you that because even on this brutal march, education was present, not as a tool for liberation, but to break the spirit and to prepare African peoples for a life of subjugation. The Coffle March was the beginning of a long legacy of education as a tool of control, and it continued with the breaking in and seasoning. I've been looking at breaking in and seasoning of enslaved African people for quite some time. And I am making the claim that the breaking in and seasoning, because if you think about the U.S., we did not have public education. There was no such thing as public education in the U.S. during the period of slaveocracy, and there certainly was not one. Public education, as we know it, didn't start until after the Civil War. But black folk, as James Anderson has told us, actually started before, during the Reconstruction era. So you didn't have education as we know it, but I would argue that we did. Because the breaking in and seasoning of African peoples laid the ideological or ontologic framework for us to build education. Now, if you talk to education historians, they will tell you that we use the Prussian model. Well, same difference, because the Prussian model, that was a warring people. That was Germany. It was a warring people. So if you think about how education was created and thought about, it was not difficult to look at that warring model when we already had a structure in the U.S. And that particular structure was the breaking in and seasoning of African people. How did that happen? Well, you were taught language. You were also taught what you would do. You were taught to take pride in your subjugation. Breaking in and seasoning is a way to make sure that you had this army of reserved poor that Lisa talked about earlier. So education, if you will, is the foundation of political disenfranchisement from how I am constructing it. So if you think about, much like the enslavement and breaking in and seasoning of Africa, education in the United States has been used to control, manipulate, and to subjugate. So if you're wondering, I call for complete abolition. Complete abolition. My case here today is simple. The colonial project of education has perpetuated anti-Black oppression for centuries, and it has been the root of the terror that we have experienced. It has been the root of the disenfranchisement we have experienced, because as Horace Mann Bond says, that education is a reflection of the society from which it's birthed, nothing more, nothing less. And I would add that education is not just a reflection of its society, it is a tool used to reinforce power structures within that society. So my talk frames education and schooling as a cultural and socioeconomic institution that is deeply political. Some people would think that teaching both sides is not political. There is no neutrality in education at all. The very system itself, why it was created. Education was created in the U.S., first presented by George Washington, to make sure that you had a president. And then your boy, Mr. Tricky, he came along and also wanted to make sure that you had education, to make sure that you had also leaders for the country. That's what education was for. But then Horace Mann, who is considered to be the father of public education, said, well, we need an education that we can ensure that the top 3% will be able to have their wealth. You will become the leaders. How y'all think he got the rich to fund education? What promises could you make? So we fell back on what we already knew, how we could teach, and that was to season. So education in the United States has not only excluded Black people from opportunities, it has served as the primary site where Black inferiority was constructed and propagated. The first university in the United States was Harvard. Everybody loved Harvard. Harvard's claim to fame was race-based research, scientific research. So when we say that race doesn't matter, it always matters, always. Because that is how we got our comeuppance as a nation. We were willing to say things that other countries would not say. And Harvard led the way with institutionalizing this knowledge. Through the curriculum, through policies of educational institutions, and through everyday interactions within school, racist ideologies were not only reflected, but created, legitimized, taught as objective truth. The legacy of this can be seen today in state-sanctioned murders of Black men, women, and children. Anti-Black perceptions and ways of knowing have been organized into the curriculum as legitimate knowledge. Whether through the erasure of Black achievement, the depiction of Blackness as savage and inferior, or the normalization, and this is where we are now, the normalization of whiteness as default. Whiteness as universal. Whiteness can fix anything is the perception that we hold here. So through these normalization of these ideas, we may have structures that change. We may have institutions that change, but these ideas reign supreme. Ideology goes nowhere. It stays and resurfaces every now and again. Carter G. Woodson called this miseducation. How does this miseducation impact our political disenfranchisement? The polity of education is such that we do not learn about how this country runs and our responsibilities within it. So the education and schooling, certainly within Black communities, have been hailed as a great equalizer. But for Black people, education is also a site of deep sorrow. During Brown versus Board of Education, we had more than 8,000 teachers. When we had DSEG laws, Brown 1 and Brown 2, we had more than 8,000 Black teachers dismissed, and Illinois carried quite a few of them. These teachers were important because these teachers represented a fugitive mindset. This fugitive mindset you could see with these teachers were the ones that students from the 60s and 70s had been educated by. These teachers were the one who made sure that Black students were able to at least traverse some of the hatred and institutionalized whiteness that they would experience. These students were political. These students understood their rights as citizens, and they made a way for themselves. When those 8,000 teachers were laid off and dismissed, what would happen? Then we would have teachers, even myself, miseducated and miseducate the young people. So if Black people are continually dehumanized within the educational system, then they are systematically excluded not only from political power, but from humanity itself. Education is a central site for us to learn about the way that this country functions, and to continue to have folk internalize or be educated through curriculum that centers whiteness. It leads to the disenfranchisement and the over-internalization of whiteness as an identity. We see that now in education where we talk about being first generation. I'm telling you right now, you better look at that. You better look at that identity. Any identity constructed by the institution is dangerous. And it has become dangerous because now it has a shape and an expectation. Now there are some responsibilities attached to it. So through education, we have experienced, or the lack of, there's no such thing as lack of education. Please, if I say nothing else to you, there is no time that folk are not being educated. None. There is formalized and informal education, but there is never a time when education is not present. It is always there. We are constantly being inundated through the media, through religion, and formalized schooling has been a central site of political disenfranchisement. So we have to ask the question, what has the educational system done in terms of our economic exclusion due to unequal educational opportunities? What has been the psychological impact of Eurocentric curriculum? And what of the ongoing legacy of the school-to-prison pipeline? And how has that impacted the political agency, our own political agency? So just to go back, education is not just a reflection of the society. It is a tool used to reinforce power structures within the society. And reparations are not just about repairing the economic damage done by slavery and segregation. It must also address the damage education has done to Black people by stripping away our identities, our histories, and our future. Just as the quietness of the Assam Maso carries the weight of the past, we must reckon with it. So too does our education system carry the weight of the damage it has done. To truly seek justice, we must begin by repairing what was broken, abolishing what was never meant to work, because schools are working just like they are supposed to. And even though I know that we as Black people hold an affinity to education, we must be critical of it. We must not swallow the red pill or the blue pill. One of them pills we can't be swallowing. To truly seek justice, we must repair, including our schools, what our schools have done to our minds and to our spirits. And we also have to hold these systems accountable. What I worry about is that if we are to think of education that is truly about alleviating our disenfranchisement, what will we create on the other side of what we have? Will we recreate the same systems that we have here? What will we do? Our miseducation renders us, to a certain degree, victimized by the very system that we hold up. So, as we think about these issues in terms of education and the way that it has been used and these ideas have been used to disenfranchise our political engagement, because for me, that is where it has to start. But it was not meant to be, and it is working. And I think all of our tasks, specifically with reparations, is to help us think about what kinds of systems, like our ancestors did. Our ancestors didn't know what was on the other side of the slaveocracy. They just knew they had to do some work, and so they did. We cannot hold on to an institution that has showed us time and time again that it is aligned with whiteness. All right, y'all, I'm done.
We'd like to thank Dr. Hoff, all of our featured speakers, Dr. Kamayo and Dr. Johnson one more time. Now we'll move on to our registered community speakers, starting with Sunshine Clemens on the enslavement period topic.
Good morning, everyone. I wrote this down, so I'm going to read it to make sure that I can stay within my time frame. My name is Sunshine Clemens. My pronouns are she and her. I am a Black woman with medium-length dark brown hair, wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt with a denim jacket covered in buttons over it. I'm one of the organizers of our local Black Lives Matter chapter. And when I hear the word reparations, my first thought is an effort to repair generational trauma caused by the enslavement of Africans brought here by violent force. As part of my work with Black Lives Matter Springfield, I had the honor of visiting Africa earlier this year for the first time on an exploratory trip to learn about the slave trade there. I spent 10 days in Ghana with Dr. Lisa Johnson, who spoke earlier. The things I learned there still haunt me 8 months later. We all know the true history of slavery is not taught, but what I learned there has changed me. The fact that our history is not taught well here was solidified during my trip to Africa. I learned of an evil hidden away and not discussed or taught at the necessary levels here in America. We toured slave castles, which really should be called slave dungeons because my people were not living in a castle. We learned the slave traders built their churches on top of the dungeons where the enslaved were chained beneath, and they incorporated the sounds of their wailing into the worship service. We stood in the cells with only enough air from a small window to keep the enslaved alive. In those same cells, we stood on the human decomposition of our ancestors. Just 3 weeks ago, I visited Montgomery, Alabama, which was also mentioned today, as part of a Journeys to Justice project to visit the Equal Justice Initiative legacy sites. While there, I learned more about the history of racial terror and lynching that happened across this country to Black people for everything from seeking freedom to protesting low wages at work. These acts of violence and racial terror have become written in our DNA. According to the National Library of Medicine and many other reputable sources, Dr. Joy DeGroy developed a theory called post-traumatic slave syndrome, or PTSS. This theory explains the set of causes of many of the adaptive survival behaviors in African American communities throughout the United States and the diaspora. PTSS is a condition that exists as a consequence of the trauma of multi-generational oppression of Africans and their descendants, resulting from centuries of chattel slavery. This is why reparations are required. Reparations are vital to the restoration and preservation of African American neighborhoods and communities. It can help us build necessities like vocational centers for the descendants of chattel slaves and the public recognition and apology, because an apology and changed behavior is absolutely necessary and it is deserved. You cannot understand the system of chattel slavery and the white supremacist systems that it birthed that still operate today and think it is not deserved. That combination can help with the emotional healing, open doors to better education of our histories so that we better know who we are. Reparations come in many forms, such as restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, and a guarantee of non-recurrence. All of these are needed and required for true progress and restorative justice. Thank you.
And next we will have Shadia Massey come and speak on racial terror. Can we all envelop her in some love? She will not be here. Shadia. Okay. Moving on to political disenfranchisement with Frank McNeil.
Good morning. I am awed by the ladies that spoke before me, and I don't know if I can reach the same level, but I'm gonna give it a shot. First of all, my name is Frank McNeil, born and raised in High Point, North Carolina. And if you've never been to North Carolina, they call it the furniture capital of the world. Now, we were talking, one of the ladies talked about they had never had a Black teacher. Well, I am a child of segregation. My first and formal education from first grade through high school was in a segregated school system. And if you understand a segregated school system, you were supposed to learn, but you were at disadvantage. This was separate but equal. I think that terminology came from the court. separate but equal. That's what we had to be. Nothing about separate and equal was equal. It was separate, and we were separated for as the ladies have explained, there was a reason why we were separated, because we weren't supposed to be able to understand, to learn, to be able to achieve. But let me get to the core of the matter, and that's political disenfranchisement. And it starts with education. That's the founding, the building block of disenfranchisement. Because if you never know that you've been disenfranchised, how do you understand what's happening to you? So, long story, graduated high school, went to an HBCU, NCCU, North Carolina Central University, in Durham, North Carolina, and had my first white teacher in 1968. My first white teacher was 1968. Everything I learned up until that point was by black teachers. And now that I look back on my education that I got through that segregated school, I am so happy. I am so happy because these were great educators. These were great people. And as I went back and started looking at their backgrounds, even during the late 40s and 50s and 60s, these people were going to Columbia, Harvard, but they couldn't get a job other than in a black school system. And so we had the best teachers. Now I realized that. We had the best teachers because these people were brilliant, and not only that, they demanded us to understand who we were and where we came from and what we should be trying to accomplish. So let me get to the real thing. Got to talk about the Voting Rights Act and why are we in this political morass that we see ourselves in today? Well, 1965 Voting Rights Act broke down the barriers, as everybody knows, to the disenfranchisement that had been going on for many years. However, one of the things that has happened is now you're seeing the slow and not so slow taking back. They're taking back what we fought so hard to get. They're taking it back because John Roberts, our Supreme Court Justice, who is the head of the Supreme Court in 2013, in Shelby County versus Holder, he removed Section 4. They found that Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was unconstitutional. And what Section 4 did, let's understand what Section 4 did, is that the Supreme Court had knocked down, and under the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court said when local jurisdictions, that's state and county governments, institute a process that limits African Americans' opportunity to vote, that they had to be, it's called pre-clearance. They had to go to Supreme, that challenging, that if you challenge that, the Supreme Court has said, no, this is discriminatory, this is anti-voting, and therefore the Supreme Court or the courts, federal courts, could say states could not do these things. Well, John Roberts said, because of the movement and how much we had achieved, we don't have to have Section 4 anymore. And as soon as Section 4 was found to be unconstitutional, Alabama was the first state. Shelby County is in Alabama. Alabama was the first state that instituted prohibitions for certain local things that they could do that didn't have to have pre-clearance anymore. So now you have to start a whole new lawsuit to try to say this is unconstitutional. So that's just one of the things that's going on. The DEI controversy is fake. Let's just tell, the DEI controversy is fake. It has nothing to do with people getting an advantage. Are you serious? An advantage to what? We compete on the same level. We take the same standardized tests. We do all of the things that everybody else does. And then when you get to a certain point in life, affirmative action never said you could hire an unqualified person. Never. Never. Affirmative action said that you had to consider people with qualifications for that position. You had to have the qualifications for the position. It wasn't about you getting a job that you weren't qualified. You had to have the requisite qualifications. So all of the Ron DeSantis and the people who are running around and some of the most ignorant people in Congress that you can find are talking about DEI. And then you have to question, what in the world, who are they talking to? And then we get to, of course, reapportionment or disproportionate. I'll put it that way, it's disproportionate. Because these people are drawing lines in districts where they can get elected and they don't have the impact. And I'm not saying that every district's got to be a black district, but they draw it in such a way that black population does not have what we call influence, the influence to influence that race. And see, when they have to appeal to other than the racist element in their district, it might be a different outcome. But instead, this is now our new fight. We got a new fight. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and we have some people that look like us that have voted against the John, and we have a Supreme Court justice that look like us that voted against. So that is a product of the miseducation of those individuals. And so that's why, again, back to education is so important. Now, getting to Springfield for a minute here. Boy. Woo boy. Coming from North Carolina in 1974 to Springfield and thinking that I was coming to the most progressive place, because, you know, you read about Lincoln and freeing of the slaves, and, you know, you go through all of that. And I got off the plane and got here, and I started looking at Springfield in the context of High Point. And all of a sudden, I saw some real red flags real quick. And as I started moving around and learning a little few things around, saying, what in the world is going on? I thought I left the South, is what I said to myself. I thought I left the South. And as we sometimes down south call this up south. And boy, was it up south here. And no disrespect to people from Springfield. No disrespect. But what I found is that they had been, if you want to say, captured in their education and their upbringing, that they were indoctrinated to believe that this was good here. And I talked to people who were much older than I and said, well, we had integrated schools when I was growing up. Well, blacks sat on one side of the classroom and whites sat on the other. How is that integrated? You're in the same classroom, but you can't intermingle. You can't use your head to talk to people. And then the ugly history of Springfield began to unravel. You had a beach blacks couldn't go to. You had a swimming pool blacks couldn't swim in. I'm saying the same thing I had when I was home. It was nothing different. It was only the mindset that was different. And so here's a troublemaker come into town, because I was called a troublemaker, of course. And I said, well, you know, guys, we can do something about this. There's a process in which we can do something about the disenfranchisement. There was what they call a commission form of government here. And when I attacked the commission form of government, the 5 commissioners, if we broke it down into wards like we have today, the 5 commissioners lived in one ward. I'm sorry, I'm gonna get through to you. The 5 commissioners lived in one ward. And what we have under Section 2 of the Voting Rights, which we sued the city of Springfield to change form of government, was vote dilution. And basically we were saying, if given the opportunity to draw wards, to draw maps and draw wards, that African Americans could make up one of the wards of the city, give us representation. And thank God we were successful. We still have a long way to go, but there's a lot that we can do. But the education, let me get back to that. The political disenfranchisement starts with the education. And if you don't believe that you can accomplish something, you're taught that you can't accomplish something, you never believe that you can accomplish it. So thank you very much. And sorry, I wish I could go longer, but I'm going to stay in with the time list.
Thank you so much to each of our registered community speakers. We will now turn to two-minute, one-way public comment. Just as a reminder, time cannot be yielded. And we will start with numbers 1 through 5. Can we line up to the left? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm so glad to see all of your wonderful faces here. My name is Shatria Smith, the Executive Director of the Garvey Tubman Cultural Arts and Research Center here in Springfield, Illinois. I was very thankful to have great speakers in regards to the conversation and the history of necessity for reparations in our community. It's long needed discussion that needs to be held in more robust circles so that we can manage and maintain a point of contention on change for our community. As a lifelong Springfieldian, born and raised right here, but I also recognize and have the knowledge of the history of my family, which goes back to 1888, and not a lot of people have that information, from Natchez, Mississippi, and there were only plantations in Mississippi, and Natchez was known to be one of the worst in Mississippi when it comes to the mistreatment of human beings. I support reparations in our community. I am a very outspoken advocate on Facebook through my poetry and teaching young people about their own history. So I agree with Dr. Hoff and Dr. Johnson in regards to the understanding, Dr. Frank McNeil, Sunshine Clemens, Dr. K, thank you, all of the notes of understanding. We need to do more, because I'm ready for my ancestors' reparations, and I want to see what that looks like in the development of my community.
Not yet. Good mid-morning. My name is Gail Simpson, and this is the face of an angry Black woman. Angry for a lot of reasons. I've not always been angry. I was a happy-go-lucky young woman in the city of Chicago. I didn't get angry until I got to SIU Carbondale and found that my white counselor relayed to the school that I probably would not be successful. That angered me. I was angry when I was told that I'm combative because I make a point about what's wrong with the society in terms of Black people. I get angry when I continually hear my history, and I know my history, but every time I hear it, it makes me more angry because not enough of us know our history to get angry. And I'm sorry, Commission, I'm angry because I didn't know that you even existed. It was by happenstance when I talked to former Alderman McNeil that he told me this was happening. I'm angry that this is not happening at the federal level. I'm angry that the people in this room could fill the first 4 roles. That's not enough. I'm angry. I'm 70 years old. I'm tired of being angry. I don't see anything changing. I look at Springfield. I'm the first African-American female alderman in the city of Springfield. That angers me. That shouldn't have happened. I should have been the 4th or 5th. I'm angry. And I shed tears, but they're not tears. They're tears of anger. We have an African American History Museum over by the cemetery. Everybody that's Black in this city should be a member. They're not. I'm also a little petty because when I see commercials where Black women are not represented, I turn them off. It angers me. I'm angry. I'm going to continue to be angry until something changes.
Ready? All right. I agree with our sister. This room should be filled. But it's not filled because of the lack of hunger among our people. But it's more empty because of the lack of action in this country for our people. The belief is gone, not in ourselves, but in systems that are set up like this, dear brother. And I always get excited when I see a young brother leading a charge. So I always try to impress upon, as we lead these groups, that we look at the systemic barriers that will hold back the fabulous work that this commission will bring forth. The recommendations, people often ask me, will it be cash payments or will it be just investments in our community? Well, we know trillions of dollars have been sent down in investments into our community, but they never make it, in fact, to our communities. So I encourage this commission to look at that and break down those barriers, because our people will never see it. No matter what we do, it will get held up by the systemic racism that's there. It will leave your hands and go into that powerful system that has been proven for many, many years. I encourage us to change our methods. We may have to go into the rough. These situations will have to go into the communities that we know is destroyed from systemic barriers and racism in our country. We will have to go to those brothers and sisters in our communities. These events are great, but we're gonna have to get out into the rough. So that's my time even before. That's the first time I've done that.
First, I want to apologize. I'm a bad public speaker, and I don't know that I have anything I can say that hasn't already been said so wonderfully and eloquently by other folks here. But I just want to say that my name is Dr. Sarah Pollocky. I have a PhD in American history from the University of Minnesota, and everything I have learned about American history has made me a wholehearted supporter of reparations that are holistic, that are economic, that are educational, that are public health focused, that are focused on environmental racism and the legacy of gentrification and redlining. I feel that certainly in the course of my educational experience, I was lied to about the legacy of enslavement and segregation in this country, and the effect that that had on me is so much less nefarious and pernicious than it has on Black youth. And I think that this reparative commission is doing incredible and really important work. I also want to say that as a white person and as a white ally in this work, there is no wrong time for white folks to begin engaging in reparative work. There is no excuse to not be engaging in reparative work. And this kind of reparations can take place in so many ways, and the work has to be done. And thank you.
Can we get numbers 6 through 10 to make their way to the stage, please?
Thank you so much. Good morning, and I really want to appreciate each of you for taking your time and coming out here. My name is Yves Doumaine. I am a naturalized citizen. I was born and I grew up in Africa, in a country called Cameroon. We were talking earlier here about education, and I really want to thank all the presenters, Dr. Kemayo, Dr. Pamela, Dr. Lisa, for really, and Mr. McNeil for talking about the issue with education. The education system that I grew up in taught us to not even see slavery as an issue. We grew up in an education system who make us believe that millions of people who went to terrible atrocity were just sitting there, have nothing to do, and were taken willingly and that system was designed by Westerner, colonizer. So when I moved here and started educating myself on how that atrocity, which took 400 years or even more, affected 1 million lives, it changed my view of many things. So I am here to learn more, because if you doesn't understand or know something, it's very difficult for you to even know where to start. So I'm here to learn more and also be part of this process, because there's a trickle effect. Sunshine, you said it. You went to Africa to visit, and probably you have the opportunity to exchange with people of my age, or you clearly realize that you see the difference. And also, we have a system here when people are complaining about DEI and trying to cancel they call it critical race theory. They try to cancel the education. We teach our kids to have an open mind and do critical thinking. How can they have an open mind, and how can they have an open mind and do critical thinking when a lot of knowledge are being taken away? Thank you so much, and I'm really here to educate myself and learn more and be part of this process. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Gina Lathan. I am principal investigator for Lathan Harris Incorporated, as well as I am a co-owner of Route History Museum, a museum that celebrates and recognizes the Black experience along Route 66, in particular, the economic contributions during Jim Crow that Black people made, as well as I am the county board member for Sangamon County District 22. I would first like to thank and recognize all of the speakers and for your hard work, your contribution. What you do and what you represent is not easy, but it's necessary. And I would also like to thank and acknowledge the commissioners, because I know you have a lofty task before you, and any way that I possibly can help in the process, please let me know. When Dr. Johnson was speaking in regard to terrorism and the stages of genocide, it really spoke to my heart as someone who was born and raised and has a generational legacy here in the city of Springfield. It also speaks to why I started Route History Museum. It wasn't by happenstance. I became the grandmother of a young boy, of a new baby, my grandson. And and as someone who had a child at 17, recognizing that there were, those points in life where if I could do it again, I would do it different, but recognizing that I knew having a Black grandson, that I knew he needed a village. And he's not the only child that needs a village. And so the work that we do, layering that into, and I know this is a question for reference, but when you're doing the work that you're doing and you're making these recommendations, how are you considering the historical underpinnings of what Black people have experienced from slavery up to this point in your recommendations, and recognizing that there are not many spaces where Black people are reaffirmed for who they are and what they brought to the table. And so from a government standpoint, because you represent the state of Illinois, not only in the systems that are funded by the government, but in those systems in itself, like those state agencies, how are the staff being required to have a full understanding of how they're framing policy that serves those communities, that make sure that the young people that are housed maybe in DCFS, or you're educating, criminal justice system, as well as any other type of space, economic development, you're making sure that they're being reaffirmed for who they are. You're creating a leadership framework for them to walk through so that they can become our future leaders. And you're also making sure that their history is recognized, and their history is recognized, and that there's a sense of accountability, not just apology, but of accountability, that we will move forward into making sure that there are reparations that are beneficial generationally. I hear a lot about putting things, oh, my time is up. Okay, we'll talk later. Bye-bye.
Hey, how you doing? Samuel Johnson. In the beginning, I heard a lot about, and I know there's a lot of, doctors and medicine, et cetera, so we understand protocol when we're dealing with facts and law, and all this has to do with law at the end of the day. So, if we got 100% on the table and we're supposed to get 100%, then we should get 100%. We shouldn't settle for 60%, 70%. We shouldn't settle for no crumbs. We should get what we're supposed to get. Ms. Gail Simpson spoke about why this is not at the federal. So what I would like to suggest to you guys, because here in Springfield, you might see with the Sonya Massey thing and stuff like that, it's a lot going on. It's a lot of organization, people, leaders, and whatnot banding together. And even though we're small, we get a lot of work done. I sometimes look at it like we're like 300. We're small, we're not that big, but we're gonna rumble. And we got a lot of stuff going on where we're gonna rumble some more right now. So you're gonna be seeing a lot of this place here where they talk about Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, et cetera. And then we all know that we're not really free. So it's about how do we really get free, or do we just get a percentage of that freedom? Well, when we're talking about law, please look into the Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3. Which is 3/5 of all the persons. We know within law, if something is not blocked out or it's not struck out in law, then it's still on the books. That is still on the books. That is our federal representation. Regardless if people like the word or not, if you look at it, and I challenge for anybody to go into a factual perspective of it, it never has been in court, it has never been yielded out, it has never been struck out, so it's still on the books. There was 3 people that was within here in America. You got the Europeans, you have the Indians, and you have us. The 1787 Convention was what created the Constitution, which described us as 3/5 of all the persons not comprehended in the foregoing description. So we have to ask ourselves, who are we? Because we got many different names. It's not hard to understand the foregoing description. We never have described ourselves. So reparations is something which I'm for, that is around money and things like that, but we have to understand something, that where's our protection? Because we can all have money, but when we got money and we got no protection, who comes in and speaks for us? So please look into that, because we have to come in on our federal representation, or we're cheating ourselves and we're leaving to our children 60% of the pie when we're supposed to have 100% of the pie. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Jarju. I'm a journalist, and I represent the Black media. I want to know if there are any media representatives here. Can anybody raise their hands? That is one of the issues here in Springfield. Central Illinois, Southern Illinois especially, is very void. It's a media desert. There's no Black media here, very little. We do come and we stay for a little while and then we go. I'm a member of the National Association of Black Journalists. I'm also a member of the Ida B. Wells Society of Investigative Journalists, and I don't know if anybody knows about that organization, but it was founded by Nicole Hannah-Jones and Ron Nixon. Anybody know who Nicole Hannah-Jones is? 1619 in critical race theory. So you know what side of the fence I'm on. Also, I am your future secretary of the National Association of Colored People here in Springfield. And I had nothing but tears today, because everybody here spoke with passion. Everybody here spoke truth, but again, it's not many people here. And I wish everybody could hear this. I don't know how we can get the word out, but as a media representative, that is one of my charges. As educators, that's what we could do. But working within a system that doesn't work for us, that's hard. And that's one of the things all of the educators here, I appreciate you. But that's one of the things that we have a problem with. How are we going to work within a system that doesn't work for us? So I just want to say in 1 second, I've been working with Dr. Betts, and one thing that hurt me was that in this school system, they do not require digital literacy. How are our kids going to make it without digital literacy? We have a problem with critical thinking. We have a problem with trauma-informed teaching and learning. We have to have that. We cannot abolish these present systems without that. We cannot unlearn destructive conditioning without that. We cannot heal without that. And we cannot construct new systems without that. Thank you.
Hello. First off, let me just say I'm glad that to see this commission here. And you have to excuse me, I did come in a little bit late, and so I have 2 questions that I hope will be answered. Looking at the structure of the agenda, we have plans and next steps near the bottom of the presentation today. And I kind of wanted to get a sense of what this commission is supposed to be here to do and what they actually are going to be doing. So I'd hope that you'd answer some of those questions. My comment has to do with the fact that, as a brother previously had mentioned about law and how law is relevant, and I know a little bit about the law. And I think that it's important that this commission and the people in here take into account in your work and in this process and understand that the law that had to do with opportunity, as Frank mentioned, DEI, affirmative action, these things are being systematically dismantled through the judicial system and the appointment of federal judges by the opposition, so to speak, the opposition party. The Republicans tend to, as we all know right now, the Supreme Court is disproportionately conservative at this point. And so they're going to dismantle affirmative action, and it's coming down the line. So as we begin to think about what reparations means, and most folks take it as a concept of maybe a check or something to that regard. But from a legal perspective, what I recognize the notion of reparations provides for us is first articulating that a debt is owed. In the law, when a debt is owed, there are legal mechanisms that can be used to repay that debt or to get what's owed. Restitution, another word for reparation, so to speak, but in the law it's called restitution. To that end, I'd encourage the committee and anybody else out here to make a point to take a look at David Montrose' The Stolen Wealth of Slavery, and we're all familiar with Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Case for Reparations, but also William Sandy Dauntry's From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 20th Century. Particularly Mr. Dauntry is an economist, and so when we start to talk about reparations, what I ultimately envision will happen as it moves into the federal level is this will become a new ground once a debt is established and a debt is owed, and once we can, oh, wow, boy, I was just spitting knowledge on y'all, so maybe you get it, maybe you don't.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vanessa Knox. I want to thank everyone for being here. We have not had any rallies, I don't believe, and I'm born and raised here, on reparations. If so, someone correct me, please. So I'm glad that we do have this. It should be standing room only. This is the first and biggest one. It should be standing room only. We've learned today how reparations have given us incredible deficits, incredible deficits. We're starting the race long before the other people have. But what oftentimes we don't hear, that's part of that, that's another deficit, is the self-love and love we have for our brothers and sisters. When you are raised in a society where you are not acknowledged, you don't really matter too much, it almost makes us think of our own brothers and sisters in the same manner. That is a consequence of reparations that has not happened for us. I urge everyone to get to know this commission, look on their website. I urge everyone to hug or shake someone's hand before they leave today that they don't know. Introduce yourself to them. This is a start. We have to love ourselves, we know that, but we have to love and respect and uplift our other brothers and sisters. No matter the whole issue over who has degrees and who doesn't, who's light-skinned, dark-skinned, who has a 3-story house, 3-car garage. I'm gonna always have probably a 1-story house and a little tiny 1-car garage. I have 3 degrees, and I still don't have any money. So it doesn't matter. We all have different talents. We all bring awesome things. We need to help and uplift each other instead of tearing each other down. Thank you.
I would like to thank all of our speakers. Give another round of applause for our expert presentations, our community speakers, and for each of the members of the public. Thank you all for attending. Moving on to additional acknowledgements, I know that County Board Member Gina Lathan already spoke, but also want to acknowledge and give you a hand of applause. Is Alderman Sean Gregory in attendance? Can we stand up and give you another applause? Thank you so much, brother. Now, briefly getting into the purpose of the commission, some of the work that we're currently undertaking now, things that are top of mind for us, as well as an outline of what the next year and a half will look like for the work. Currently, the ADCRC is working on recommendations for the Slavery Era Disclosure Bill. And that bill is going to aim to reveal connections that institutions, potential vendors, and those who might be seeking state contracts, the connection that they had to the institution of slavery. In addition to that, we're currently exploring the role of data disaggregation in our work. We understand that all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? Not everybody who has black skin has the exact same experience of those who descend from the institution of chattel slavery. So we want to make sure that we have an understanding of what the disparities are for those individuals who descend from the institution of U.S. chattel slavery versus individuals who may have chose to migrate here. I mean, we have seen through research thus far that there are differences in U.S.-born black individuals and foreign-born black individuals in pretty much every socioeconomic indicator. In addition to that, we are planning 6 more public hearings. We want to receive input from the public on those next 8 harm areas. We showed them on the screen. They're also on our website. But we have already talked through enslavement, racial terror, and political disenfranchisement. We want to talk through those next 8 topics as we begin to compile our big deliverable. In December of 2025, you all should begin to hear some more rumblings regarding the harm report that we will be publishing. This harm report is going to establish the basis for all of the recommendations that we will be able to make to the state legislature. In order for us to make sure that we are legally sound and that things that we recommend won't be able to be challenged, we have to publish this harm report. And each of the recommendations that we receive from the community as well as from our research team will draw from that harm report. Once again, I say that harm report, you will begin to hear more information about it in December of 2025. So be on the lookout for that. Please go to our website at adcrc.illinois.gov. Sign up for our email list to keep abreast of all of the work that we're working on currently, and give any recommendations that you might have for the direction of the work. Okay, so that is the kind of the totality of what the commission is working on currently. If you are interested in really getting into the nitty-gritty with respect to the details of the commission, I encourage you to go to the website. Our statute is there. The statutory tasks are there. The creation of a vocational training center for people of African descent, the preservation of African American neighborhoods, equitable, proportionate representation in all state contracting, and the creation of this slavery era disclosure bill. Those are 4 things that we're currently focused on, but overall our scope is large. Our scope is to ensure equity, equality, and parity for every African American descendant of chattel slavery. Huge scope. So it has a lot of room for each and every single one of your ideas and suggestions, and we encourage you to engage with us on those. With that being said, I would like to call up Alderman Sean Gregory for our adjournment, and we thank you all for your time.
Thank you. This is no funeral. This is a time that we should have what we do have, energy and excitement for our communities. We stand on the shoulders of powerful people, people that fought, bled, and died just for us to see this day. We've always been spiritual people. Well, we know our God says, where there is 2 or 3 together, that he is there with us. And we can do all things. So I'm excited. We go back to our communities and we take this excitement back to those communities and share with our brothers and sisters and say, there's going to be another hearing, and I want you to come with me. This is real, and we're going to push it through because we're going to make sure of it. We stand on the backs of our ancestors. We stand on the backs of the way makers, which we have in the room today. The Honorable Frank McNeil spoke on his fight in '87 to change the form of government that made way for our dear sister, the Honorable Gail Simpson, to become the first black woman, to make way for the Honorable Roy Williams to be the first black man to represent the ward he sits in, and to make way for me, one of the youngest black people to serve on Springfield City Council, off the shoulders of a brave move by not only Frank, but those gentlemen who also fought with him. But I'm only here to close this thing, and I actually wrote something out. I usually go off of the heart as I did there, but I wanted to be elegant today. So as we conclude today's event, I want to take a moment to reflect on the importance of our gathering and the work we are committed to do. It has been an honor to sit and listen to you all as we discuss the legacy of our ancestors and the journey towards